Welcome to How to Ask Good Questions. Now, in this lecture, it is Sam talking to you, not Ben, so you might notice a different voice. And I am here, one of the co-instructors on the course. I help out in the Q&A, and you'll see me in some of the later videos way down in a few sections time, so don't worry if you don't hear my voice for a little while yet. And what I'm going to be taking you through is the process of asking good Q&A questions so that you can get the results that you want. Here's an example of the question that I'm going to ask and get answered during the process of this video, and it will help me solve some really basic initial beginner programming question that I had. So let's dive right in. So I've really only just started the course and started doing my first programming exercise, and I'm already having a problem. So if you're in this situation, you're going to want to go to the Q&A and start asking basically, why is this going wrong? And that's great, and we really encourage you to participate in the Q&A as soon as possible. As soon as you have issues, just go dive in there. Don't be afraid. And even if you haven't watched this lecture, don't be afraid to dive in. But I want to show you how you can make our job of answering you really easy, and other students too. How other students will be able to answer you so much easier if you follow these simple instructions. So here I have a simple problem. I've done my first console application, but I'm getting these build errors, and I'm not entirely sure what's going on. So the first step of the process isn't even to ask the question. No, it's to ask the question to a rubber duck first. So this is called rubber duck debugging. It's something real programmers do it. They have little ducks that they put on their keyboards. And the idea is that you speaking aloud and talking about your problem helps you solve it even before having to ask the question. So explain your problem out loud and walk through your current understanding. And inevitably, this enigmatic sensei will say nothing to you, but you may well figure it out. It may certainly give you at least 3 things to do to test your understanding and to see whether you can fix the problem yourself. So my first step would be, okay, well, maybe I didn't install the right version of Visual Studio, so I might go and reinstall Visual Studio. Then I might say, well, maybe I didn't type it right, so I'm going to retype the stuff out, but I still get a problem. And then I might say, well, maybe there's actually something wrong with my computer, and even go and reinstall the entire computer or something. Or I might, try and fix a few spelling mistakes and so on. So that gives me at least 3 things to try just by talking through my understanding of the fact that I've written some code and that it needs to be compiled. And is it actually compiling? Maybe I'll test it by going to build and test the build solution, see whether it works, and saying, no, there's this errors happening at the bottom. So what is going on? I'm still not entirely sure. So the next step is to ask the question, and I'd like to show you what is the question structure, because once we get into more complicated types of question, it can sometimes be hard to understand what people are actually wanting to get out of it. So the first thing you start with is what you want to get out of it, the expected behavior. So in this case, I expect my code to run and to have the hello world printed, but that's not happening. So what do I actually get? Well, I get some error messages. I get these error messages down here. So it would be very useful to include these error messages and a screenshot of them into my Udemy question. So just to show you the Udemy question, it's always best to do it against the lecture where you're having the problem. So it's contextual. We know what stage you are in the course. So I might say that let's start with my observed behavior. And here I can take a screenshot using the snippet tool in Windows and just search for snippet tool. On Mac, there's some keyboard shortcuts. I'm sure you know how to take screenshots. I'll leave that up to you. But for example, I'll take a screenshot of the entire area I think might be relevant, hit save, save it somewhere, perhaps on my desktop. And then I'm going to load this in to Unity and let it do its upload process, and then I have an observed behavior. At this point, I should also have an expected behavior beforehand if I'm following the structure. And then what comes next? So next up, we need to tell people how you got here in the first place. What were the steps that now allow someone else to do the same thing? Well, for me, it's simply that every time I open Visual Studio. So I create a new project in Visual Studio. It's a new C++ Visual Studio project, and then I type in my code. I get this error. So let me type that up. So there we go. Now someone else could try and replicate the same effect as me. What comes next? Well, what have I tried already? Well, I can tell them that. I've already tried reinstalling Visual Studio. I've already tried retyping my code, and I've already tried, let's say, reinstalling even my computer, for example. So now what comes next? Other useful information, such as the version of Visual Studio perhaps that I used, perhaps my code as well. So let's add that in. Now I can find my Visual Studio version by going to File, actually Help, I believe, About Microsoft Visual Studio. And there we go, I've got basically version 14 update 3, so I'll just put that in, just in case that might be useful to someone. And what I also want to do is include my code. So the best way to include code is not to do a screenshot of it, because that doesn't allow people to search through your code and really check it. So here's the thing, you want to include screenshots when they're really useful, such as screenshots of some error messages, the Unreal Editor windows, when they help basically explain your steps or when they help explain your observed behavior. But don't do it for code all the time. You could include your code right in here inside the question by using this little curly braces button at the top of your question. That allows you to just paste the code right in there and then format it nicely. Or the alternative, which is probably better, is to use a gist. Now, a gist is provided by GitHub, so it's gist.github.com. And what you can do is you can take your code, like so, copy it, and take it on over to the gist and paste it in there. Now, what you can do is give the name of the file. In my case, the file is called console application1.cpp. And then what I can do is create a public gist. And this will have done code formatting, code highlighting for me automatically, and given me a unique link, which I can then use to link to this my code. I'll select my code, I'll select the link icon at the top of the question, insert the link, and then paste the URL in there. So now people can go and take a look at the code, which is needed basically to reproduce my behavior. Now, what you'll notice is I'm being minimal with this. Don't include extra steps. There's no extra steps than I took. And this is all very shortly written, because you've got to think that people have got limited time. They're reading your question. You want it to be as brief as possible. So just keep it brief and keep it to the minimum amount. And you want to also keep the test case to the minimum amount. So don't include extra steps to reproduce if you could actually reproduce it with less. Or maybe take out lines of code if there are lines of code that don't cause the error, so that it's really obvious where that error is coming from. So minimum steps to reproduce. And then finally, be a Q&A ninja. So the first thing there is to summarize in your title. You'll notice that I started off by actually writing the body first. And then what I'm going to say is error compiling, or that's quite vague. I wouldn't go with such a vague error. I would say error compiling my first hello world, or something like that. But just make sure that it summarizes your title, and then you can go ahead and post that question. And once you've posted your question, it says sometimes it will complain about external links. You might have to post it twice. And then what's going to happen next? What are you going to do as a Q&A ninja next? I'd like you to stay responsive, so as people are replying, make sure you are replying. And fundamentally, when a good reply comes in, it says, for example, then what I'm going to do is go and try that out, because I'm very responsive. I'll try it out, then I go and see that it actually does indeed work. I rebuild and my hello world is functional again. Then don't forget to come back and mark a top answer, because this means that it no longer comes up on our dashboard as an unanswered question, which means that we can concentrate on solving the questions that haven't been answered yet. So this is very vital. Even if you come back and answer your own question and mark it as top answer, as I've just done, that's still very helpful to us. So make sure that you share if you solve it. That will help other students, as well as making sure that the question gets marked as resolved. And then finally, once you've got your resolution, go and be altruistic. Go and find some other questions that you can try and help to chime in on and make a next step for that person. In fact, let's go and do that now. This is going to be your challenge for the lecture, to go and answer. Go forth and answer. I'd like you to find a question in the previous videos. Try to provide some sort of suggestion. Use your rubber ducking technique on their question, or just use your own experience and try and make a suggestion for what they should try next. And then, how well do you think the question was answered? Do you apply these criteria to try and think about, is that a good question? Was that hard for me to answer? And that should help you in future to write better questions. Obviously, don't go telling the person you've asked a rubbish question. Just try and provide some value to them, but try and think, will this be helpful for me in the future? Okay, so pause the video. In fact, we've finished, so you can go ahead and do that.